Mistrustful. Let's
With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Welcome back to Heard Tell. Okay, let's go back over to the UK. Everybody's had their little break from our UK news for the last few weeks we've been going through. There's a lot going on over there. This is who's going to walk us all through it, explain it so well that even I will be able to understand it. He's a Young Voices contributor, real sharp guy. Looking forward to this. Benjamin Coates, how are you, sir? Thank you so much for the time.
Hello, Andrew. No worries. I'm well, thank you.
Live from London on this fine day. Let's start here, big picture, because of course all the eyes of the world were on England and the UK for the last 2-3 weeks now with the passing of the Queen. Politically, though, that became kind of the eye of the storm because things politically were going kind of really ugly. Everybody kind of got the pause because of the Queen's death. You have this great moment of national unity. Boy, howdy, has the storm come back and in a hurry, hadn't it?
Well, I think is it the Chinese proverb about interesting times, and they're interesting times here.
Yeah, definitely. We're going to talk some foreign policy with you because you've been writing about it, but let's start domestically because everybody's worried about that. The cost of living crisis. People are talking about taxes. People are talking about economic programs. People are talking about getting direct assistance to people for this looming winter. Let's just start that. You got a brand new prime minister who, how's that for your second day on the job and the Queen died?
Yes.
Get handed that one. So really, this has kind of been her first week at work for all intents and purposes. How's it going? Is it as rough on the ground as it's looking on the media and from afar?
Well, I mean, I suppose it is. Just only, I think, an hour ago, I think a poll came out with something like a 20 or 30 point Labour lead, which is only seen that in the mid-90s, just before Blair came in. But there are big caveats to that. We're not going to have an election tomorrow. And there does seem to have been an overreaction to the sort of so-called mini budget and all the rest. I don't want any of your listeners to switch off, so I won't talk too much about it. But there are so many problems in the world economically for a lot of countries. The very strong dollar, obviously all that's going on in Ukraine. And I think perhaps the pound and Britain has been singled out a little, and there've definitely been market jitters. But I think nothing is happening here that is unprecedented. We're lowering our top rate of tax to the rate it was during a Labour government. It's still more than many countries, including the US. And every nation really in our position, and Germany's just announced this, will be giving money for energy prices this winter. Nothing that strange was announced. And I think it is a bit of a storm in a teacup. That's not to say that there aren't recessions coming and difficult economic times, but that's not entirely down to the budget, far from it. And you'll see that Europe-wide at least.
Yeah. One of our founding principles on our program is things don't happen in a vacuum, they happen in a sequence. For the casual observer, though, because everybody focuses on the moment, they're like, well, the conservatives have been in power for 12 years, so it's more than that, because we understand economics is an up and down thing over decades, not over even years or quarters. There's repercussions. You've had a lot of economic things happen in the UK. You have demographic change, you have immigrant change, you have Brexit. Going back the last 10 or 15 years, especially, because everybody's talking about that 12 years of conservative rule, as they should, because, cyclically, it's going to catch up to you at some point. But economics don't go along with the politics. Go to the last 10 or 15 years that brought Britain to this moment. Yes, there's a crisis, but what the crisis is really doing is revealing the cracks in the issues that were already there, right?
That's absolutely right. And I think that in democracies, at least, you reap what the guy before you sowed. And we are now seeing the culmination in many regards of the mismanagement of our country for decades under both Blair in New Labour and also the Conservatives since 2010, where we haven't had a jot of economic growth since 2008. We didn't invest when it was cheap to borrow. We didn't build the nuclear power stations that we've needed to build. And we've had a historic shortage, which is completely voluntary, by the way. It's based on legislation and it wouldn't cost a penny to repeal, with regards to planning permission to build houses and also, businesses and scientific labs. So Liz Truss really has got into the chair at the wrong point. And I'm not saying that the budget was perfect or the messaging around it is perfect, but we are now a relatively poor country, which is a bitter pill to swallow. And it's one I think a lot of my countrymen refuse to. But the situation we're in really has been, as you say, a culmination of 10 or 20 years of actions. She came to the job a couple of days ago. No one, however bad, could screw up an economy in 2 or 3 days that didn't have very serious problems made by people previous.
Yeah, Ben Coach joining us from London. It's always going to be a little bit of both. The policies you actually enact and the policies you don't enact. Both of those have almost, an effect. Give me the ratio, because you have a parliamentary system. So especially in America, we look at it like, with very few legal exceptions and a little bit of judicial oversight, pretty much what Parliament says goes. So even more so than in the States, when it's a policy, either omission or commission sin of policy, whether you did it or you didn't do a policy or the policy was bad, this is almost entirely on Parliament. Yes.
Yes, fundamentally, yes. One of the troubles with our country is that I suppose business life and economic life more generally actually goes through loads of layers, local government, planning permission, things like that, where Parliament should have legislated, and Parliament has the power. Parliament has supreme power. The saying goes that Parliament could ban smoking on the streets of Paris, which is, as it were, an analogy to say that Parliament is supreme in our constitution. It can command anything. But our politicians in Westminster haven't commanded the things that would improve economic growth. So the trouble is that actually you've had local politics strangle housing, strangle scientific lab spacing, and so on. Was really one of the big contributors to our economic crisis. If you're thinking about trying to locate cost of living problems in the UK, which obviously is a big theme, try the fact that the percentage of your income to either rent or mortgage is vastly higher than really any time in our country's history. So yes, it is a problem in Parliament. It's caused often by actions lower down. But yes, it is on Parliament that we're here.
Ben Coach joining us. Let's talk prime ministers. You got the brand new one in Liz Truss. You had Boris Johnson, of course, Theresa May before her, and then we can go on back as far as you want to go. I think she's purposefully, and it's part of her character. Boris, good, bad, or indifferent, was a bit of a circus at all times. Even when you're doing something he liked, It was still a circus. I think she purposefully set a sober turn in her demeanor. Her first prime minister questions was very by the book, better matter of fact. It seems to me that she gets the moment. Does she really have a whole lot of options here? Because like you said, it's probably an overreaction right now. And you're talking, let's be honest, the stuff they're doing with this budget, this is wonky terms. This is tax rates. This is, marginal incomes. This isn't really good messaging stuff. And everybody's aware that winter's coming, and this winter is going to be hard no matter what you do. You already touched on it. Practically, there's probably not a lot of levers she has to pull here. What should this government be doing messaging-wise to try to maybe get something out to the people? Because just talking about tax rates ain't going to hack it.
No, and the optics of doing a tax cut, whatever the merits of the policy, was appalling. Announcing a cut to the top rate of tax at this moment was an appallingly bad maneuver in terms of appearances to people on the street. But it's really, really insignificant. The cut to the basic tax rate costs far more, and Labour say they're going to keep it. The energy cap costs a lot more, and we're going to keep that. Everyone wants to keep some sort of subsidy for energy, otherwise people will simply freeze to death given events. What needs to be the messaging really is that economic growth, which is what they've set out to do, is the only way out, medium to long term, of the decline that this country has seen, arguably since the end of the Second World War. It has been a century almost of decline, and what we need is economic growth. The top rate of tax cut was a bad decision in terms of optics. It doesn't actually change much economically. The message needs to be that we need growth, and also that people are going to be supported, because in the whole fuss we've had, people are completely forgetting the quite generous energy subsidies. And there have been all sorts of graphs on Twitter and in the papers which show that people on higher incomes benefit from the income tax decreases. Yes, that's true, but if you add in the very substantial reduction to people's energy bills, that completely flips it around. Because naturally, let's say you're doing very well, you're doing extremely well, doing $500,000 a year. Naturally, on a graph, you are going to benefit a great deal from the cut in 45% going down to 40% of the top rate tax. But you're probably not going to notice the energy subsidy. Yet, let's say you're on £25,000 a year. Okay, you're not going to get a great deal of benefit at all from the cut in tax, but you will see a vast help from this energy subsidy. So there needs to be the messaging that we need growth, and there needs to be the messaging that actually there is help. Ignore what's on, the news, ignore what the stock market does over the course of 2 or 3 days. Markets panic, people get on bandwagons. There's help and we need growth. That's what I'd do.
Ben Coach joining us. Longer term economic and much harder to deal with, though, is the things people do notice. They notice their food prices when they go to buy food and groceries and such like thing. They notice their housing cost prices, whether that be renting or mortgage or whatever the case may be. Those are things that are lagging indicators. Those aren't things you're going to be able to just, helicopter money, we call it economically. You're not going to helicopter money food costs. That's a longer term thing. That gets into some of the trade issues that the UK is having, that gets into some of the kind of baked into the state that the UK finds it. I know they're talking about it. Is there any actual plans in the works to do anything about it? Because it's probably too late for the winter, but going into the spring, going into next year, part of leadership is having not just an immediate plan because the voters are upset, but a long-term plan. Does anybody seem to have one?
Well, when you talk about rent, food prices, I think the honest thing, although I think if you're a senior politician, you probably shouldn't say this given how easily the markets do speak. The fact is that there is going to be a recession. It will probably last a year or two. It will not be isolated to the United Kingdom, and has precious little to do, actually, with Liz Truss's 2-week-long premiership. However bad a politician you were, you could not possibly have caused all that is coming to us. It would not be a popular line to deliver. And it's one I don't think politicians should deliver, purely because, again, markets spook. But the fact is that due to the war in Ukraine, due to a historic stupidity amongst European leaders, and by that I include the British, in terms of not taking up stuff like nuclear energy, and the very strong dollar that's causing problems in Asia as well, it's going to be really tough for a year or two. There are things that the government can do, but you cannot avoid what is going to be a global recession, probably, definitely a continental recession, for a year or two. Sometimes I think you just have to put your hands up and realize that it's going to be tough.
Would it be good messaging, Ben Coach joining us, for Liz Truss? you can't say it the way you just said it, because like you said, politics is marketing and branding. You can't say it like that, but wouldn't it just be good politics? Because there's no way this is going to have a good ending in the near term for her to just come out and say, look, this is going to be hard, because we've seen this with our own president on certain things. If you don't take some of the blame, if it gets better later, you're going to have a hard time getting any of the credit. Should she get out in front of this a little bit? How much honesty is needed for the moment? How much honesty is too much honesty with the I hate to use the term because it gets into economic stuff, but there's going to be some bad times coming soon. There's going to be some attrition here, just bluntly. How much should she take some blame now and just get in front of it? And how much truth is too much truth, do you think?
Well, I suppose that the truth would almost be that her taking any blame would be a little wrong. As I've said, I think the real problems are structural. I think the real problems are historical. Should she be honest and say tough times coming? Yes. But you also have to have a certain amount of optimism. There are very, very significant gains that a government can make in terms of our economy by deregulating, because we've got some very poor regulations that actually don't cost a penny. They cost the salaries of whoever is rewriting the legislation. We can do that, and it will have a certain effect, and it will have an increasing effect as the years go on. Really, if you're looking at her political situation, I think the trouble is she's got into the chair at the wrong point. We are 2 years away from an election. Do I think ultimately that some of the pro-growth messaging, but also measures that are hinted at in the mini budget, do I think they're ultimately the right path? Yes. Do they really need to be enacted over, let's say, a 5, 10, even 15-year time span to really have the effect? Yes. She's only got 2 years. It's a very, very sticky wicket, to use a cricket analogy, which may not be best for American radio, but there we go. I think that, yes, she needs to say times are tough. Yes, she needs to emphasize that the growth is what matters, and that there is growth. The British economy could be substantially bigger than it is now, and it would require very little government intervention. It actually requires the government to stand back and let businesses get on with things. But in the ultimate analysis, it maybe doesn't matter what she says. She's only got 2 years. She's basically sat down on the chair. The Queen has died, and now there's a recession. Be careful what you wish for, perhaps. Maybe it's a very important tale for all of us. She's got the dream job, and I think it's probably too late.
Yeah. Now, you said Ben Coach joining us. You're saying 2 years. Most of the people we've talked to in the UK, most of our contributors over there, they're like, in reality, she's got about 2 months to really make this thing work, to make her name on it, to kind of get a handle on this. She's got a very small window. She's got a very cantankerous parliament to deal with. Labor seeing their best numbers in decades, so they're licking their chops. She's probably not super sure about some of the folks sitting behind her on the benches because she's new to the job. Is this one of the tougher non-wartime premiership starts that we've seen? And put it in a little bit of context, just how steep a hill we're talking here.
Well, I think wars are a lot easier, bluntly. Because the very worst.
I was an enlisted guy, not on my end, but I take your point.
Yes, for politicians, wars are a lot easier. Maybe I'll rephrase that. It's extremely tough, and I think that if she did pull off even a very slim majority at the next election, it would be a real comeback story, possibly even worthy of a feature-length film. It is very tough, and there's really no sugarcoating that can improve that. But I think it would be tough for anyone in that position, and whether that she may survive. Let's say they lose the next election, would she survive to fight another election? Probably not. But I think you've got to have a certain amount of admiration for her for trying.
Ben Coach joining us from London, UK contributor with Young Voices, sharp guy. Let's talk foreign policy, something that's kind of up your alley. Meanwhile, while all this is going on, the world keeps turning. That's just the way things are.
Yes.
The UK has some pretty serious foreign policy issues going on. Domestically, they've got plenty of issues like we just detailed, but even inside the domestic, Northern Ireland's a problem. They've got the Channel migrate problem. Wider than that, though, they've been getting credit for their support of Ukraine. You've done some writing, though. The Royal Navy, which, for a long time, the standard of the world and Britain's pride in a lot of ways, their national pride, not in great shape right at the moment. I know that seems like maybe a smaller priority to, food prices and stuff, but you can't be a world power without a world power military. And there's some cracks that are very apparent, and you've been writing about it when it comes to the Royal Navy.
Well, there are, and I think problems with your military, if you are indeed a sort of a global player, don't matter until they do, and when they do, they matter a great deal. And you've seen this with Russia. Russia, on paper, had a very strong military. Some said it was the second strongest military in the world after the United States. We've seen really what happens if you maybe have the numbers on paper, maybe even have the tanks or the artillery pieces or whatever. But if you don't have the right sort, and if you're not properly trained and so on, that means very little. Now, when you look at the Royal Navy, the training is excellent. A lot of the ships, they're modern. A lot of the radars, all the rest, and the fighter aircraft that we share with you, we buy the F-35 like you do, are excellent. So you might be wondering, well, what's the matter? The trouble is that we don't have enough aircraft. We can fly off carriers, and we don't have the missiles to fire off them, and we don't have the missiles that we need to fire off our ships. There was a recent House of Commons sort of session where they described our Navy as a porcupine Navy, which is to say that it's more than capable of defending itself, but it has extremely little ability to actually reach out and attack. And that's the big problem. And that we'd see that as a problem if we go to war over Taiwan.
Ben Coates joining us. We saw what happened in Afghanistan. The American pullout made a mess. Our British friends stood with us through the mess. They carried a lot of that burden, frankly, honorably and very heroically, by the way. We've been allies for a long, long time. The special relationship, look, my military service, we did lots of cross stuff with the Brits. I always enjoyed working with them for a lot of reasons. Not to mention that the Queen still let them drink deployed and we weren't allowed, but we'll talk about that some other time. But it's an amazing relationship, and one that both parties really enjoy getting to work together and serve together. We trust each other. I don't know that trust extends to the bureaucracies that manage our militaries. In the U.S., of course, there's the massive military-industrial complex. There's a lot of bureaucracy that's involved. For an audience that's not familiar with it, what is the state of the political and the bureaucratic part of the UK's armed forces, Whitehall? What is its standard? Is the bureaucracy the problem? Is it the politics of it? Is it the higher leadership? Because the frontline troops are excellent. I will attest to that personally. We saw them in Afghanistan. The bravery's still there. So the problem's got to be coming from the top, yeah?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And thank you for your kind words. And I know for a fact that British troops always think highly of the American ones with whom they train, alongside whom they fight. I don't think the problem really is necessarily anywhere within our military. The problem, and I hate to sound like a broken record, but history, both recent and more generally, hasn't been so kind to us. Since the end of the Cold War, and particularly after the financial crisis in 2008, the British Armed Forces received exceptionally little funding. Further, they were expected to operate in Afghanistan and Iraq out of their budget, which diminished it further. And yet another problem was that naturally, when you're having all those counterinsurgency operations, there's a very, very tempting thing to cut, which is the Navy, because you can't sail many ships in Afghanistan or Iraq. You instead want to be buying things like, Humvees, which can resist mines and that sort of stuff. So the trouble is that this shortage of missiles and aircraft comes not only from low spending, but the fact that for 10, 15 years, we were fighting with you guys in the global war on terror. So funding priority has been everywhere other than what you could call great power competition and the sort of naval forces you'd need for that.
Ben Coates continuing to join us from the UK. When you look at a military, though, having a military is extremely expensive. You have two concurrent events running parallel right now that I think will conflict with the UK people, because you have a cost of living crisis. So it's like, well, why are we spending money on a military and a cost of living crisis? But at the same time, they all watch what happened in Ukraine. It's like, okay, this is why you spend on a military, because at any given moment, some madman does something crazy, and you really, really need to have a strong military. Those narratives are going to war with each other. They always have in the history of mankind. That's just how it is in the modern world. How does that play out in the UK, though? Because they're happening at the same time. Everybody's seeing both, but one of them's hitting your dinner table and the other one's hitting your conscience. Walk us through how that's landing with the folks in the UK.
Well, that's a very good point. Of course, belts are tightening, and we also need to spend some more money on defence. I suppose your second point, that obviously Ukraine's been going on, I think very few people in our country right now would question the need for sensible defence spending. Obviously, it can't be a blowout, but the problems we have, particularly with regards to the Royal Navy, are not that expensive to fix. They're not cheap, nothing in defence is, but they're not that expensive. And I think with the world as it is now, with the invasion of Ukraine, with rising tensions over Taiwan, I don't think it'd be politically too hard to sell to increase defence spending by 10 or 20%, which ultimately would not leave us with an outrageous, egregious outlier in terms of our defence spending. It would actually be very easy to get that money and more if we cut our foreign aid budget. The foreign aid budget is probably the juiciest, biggest slice of government spending cake that there is, which very few people in our country would actually object to rowing back on, given circumstances. Whether there's a political will or nous to do that, I don't know. But the money that we need to correct the problems I've identified is there, just about.
Yeah, Ben Coates joining us. One more question on the foreign policy front. There's long been a sense that there would be trouble in the Commonwealth when the Queen died. That has happened now. There seemed to be a lot more steadiness, and I think some people, maybe a lot of that was overblown. There are a few places, though, the Caribbean, other places, that are starting to talk about it. Is that an issue in the UK? Are people thinking or talking about it? Is it a back burner? Is it just media noise? Talk to us about the current state of the Commonwealth and the future of it.
The Commonwealth is, I think, for some people, an emotional attachment. But I think that attachment is largely limited to those who would be very interested in politics, and maybe those in government. The man in the street, as it were, has extremely little interest in the Commonwealth. Less interest still if someone in the Caribbean doesn't want King Charles as head of state. It really doesn't matter to us. I suppose it's as blunt as I can be. Monarchies continue. That's the nature of monarchies, and so King Charles has been widely accepted, and there's been a lot of sympathy, even on the personal level. You may not be a monarchist, but on a personal level, obviously, the gentleman's lost his mother and has had to parade for days and days and days on end before, without wishing to be crass, his mother's body was cold. And so on a human level, there's a great deal of sympathy for him. There's no threat to the monarchy in this country. It will continue for decades, really, probably centuries at least. I think it's probably something which is going to go on and on and on. Whether it continues in Australia, whether it continues in the Caribbean, really, I think that's a matter for Australian or Caribbean politics. It's not the talking point here. Commonwealth simply has extremely little relevance to British politics and British daily life.
Yeah, Ben Coates, let's loop back to where we started, something that has a lot to do with your daily life, the current economic crisis at hand. Look, politics is a minute by minute thing. You can go crazy chasing, especially if you're over here trying to pay attention to a foreign country's politics. Give us a couple big picture things to pay attention to over the next couple of weeks, whether it's a policy thing or just the general messaging. The pound's way the lowest I've ever seen it in my lifetime. I can't believe how low it is. Give us a couple things that we should pay attention to, so when it does break through our news feed, you go, "Oh, okay, that's one of those things I need to pay attention to that's going on over there. That's an indicator I need to watch."
Well, I suppose one of those things would be how the market behaves after this shock. I think it's been a panic, and I'm not an expert in economics by any means, but I think just today the pound went up to, I think, was it $1.10, where it had been on a low, I think 1.03. So already we're seeing a bit of a recovery. That would, what I would say, be an important thing. Does the panic that we've seen over the past, few days really carry on over the next few weeks or months? I suspect not. As I said, it's going to be a recession. It's going to be a recession, and Europe-wide, it's probably going to be a worldwide recession. There is not going to be a tremendous amount of economic good news for the next few years, as awful as it is to say. But I think one of the things you'll see is definitely the markets coming to their senses a bit and realizing that nothing in that mini budget or anything else is some strange outlier. It's really economics, as usual in the grand scheme of things. There's nothing that should cause any level of panic. As to a second thing, well, I think our politics really is buried in the cost of living stuff now. I think the second thing more generally, I don't think we were directly involved, but a second thing more generally, I think, to watch the news is how this Nord Stream pipeline stuff transpires. It seems to be the perhaps the world's highest stakes game of Cluedo or something. It's a murder mystery. Who blew up the pipeline? It seems to be in no one's interest really to do this, other than perhaps the United States, but that would obviously be an extremely rash course of action, blowing up, allied pipelines, so to speak, sort of their share between Russia and the rest of Europe. I just, on a purely personal level, fascinated. I'd be fascinated to know what was going on there, because it really you'd think it was not in the Russian interest. They can simply turn the pipeline off. I don't know why they blow it up. But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. When irrational things involve people that have already proven to be irrational, it's hard to deal with it. I have my theories. We'll keep them to ourselves for right now because we're talking UK politics with our friend Ben Coates. Love talking with you. Great information. Appreciate it. Kind of sounds like y'all just need to print a whole bunch more runs of those steady on shirts. Is that kind of how it feels right now?
Yeah, I think that sort of attitude will get you a long way.
Yeah, it's almost a cliche, but at times like this, also a lot of good wisdom in there. Ben Coates, enjoyed your insight. Appreciate the time. We'll get you back. Until we see you on Heard Tell again, though, let folks know where they can follow you, what you've got going on. We're going to link to two different pieces he wrote, one on the Royal Navy, another one on the Conservative Party. That's an interesting window from about a month ago where things have changed a little bit. It'll be fun to come back and see how well you did with that.
Yeah, I think any articles predicting political events and polls and such are, probably foolish.
Yeah, tell me about it. I got one floating around out there about how Biden shouldn't be president, but here we are. Part of the gig, my friend, part of the gig. Let folks know how they can follow you and keep up with you until they hear from you again on Heard Tell.
Well, I'd stay glued to your radio station because I'm far too clever to have any Twitter accounts or anything like that. So don't worry, you won't have to hear any of me more, and you don't have to read any of the rubbish I put out.
He does have a Young Voices page. We'll link to the pieces. Make sure you read them in full. They're very, very good. He's playing it down. Sharp guy. Enjoy talking to him. Got to get you on Twitter, man. It's more fun out there. You get all kinds of.
I'm on Twitter, but I'm too clever to put my name to it. I'm too clever to put.
Yeah, I had a great one yesterday because I took a run at Patriarch Kirill and got the Russian bot farms after me about how I need to be eaten by the teeth of the dogs and that kind of fun stuff. I actually tweeted it back out. So there's mess on there, my friend. But that's why we talk to good friends like you, people of good faith, and we hash things out. Ben Coates, thank you so much for the time today, my friend. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me on, Andrew.
Yeah, do it again soon, sir. Thank you.